Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. Very excited to chat with my old pal, entrepreneur Cliff Chenfeld. We'll get to Cliff in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review, and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let me tell you a little bit about Cliff. Cliff Chenfeld is an NYU Law School graduate, music entrepreneur, writer, radio host, and film producer. He co-founded and was co-CEO of Razor and Tie, an independent music company that included a label, a music publishing company, and the top kids audio brand, Kidz Bop. He's also been a partner in several music festivals, including WonderBus and WonderWorks, and has executive produced a number of films, including Joan Baez, How Sweet the Sound, Serious Moonlight and Concussion. He is the host of the NPR radio show Modern Sounds and writes a monthly Substack column on new music. He also serves on several nonprofit boards and is active in Democratic politics. Cliff, welcome into the back room.
It is a pleasure to be here, my friend.
So in preparation for this, I was trying to remember how many years ago we first met. And it was probably right when you started Razor and Tie. So when was that?
We started Razor and Tie in 1990, and I think I met you shortly thereafter. Mm-hmm. And as a big fan of the back room, I do believe you referred to a Razor and Tie event in one of your recent shows that occurred in 1991, which you attended. So I've known you at least since 1991. Mm-hmm.
You are referring to my conversation with the one, the only, Danny Bonaducci.
Yes. In fact, I know you and your people have been trying to get me on the show for a long time, and I was reluctant to do it. You know, you could have Frank Rich,
all the big stars,
Michael Steele, mm-hmm. Right? That wasn't enough for me, but when you got Bonaducci, I agreed to come on.
He was fabulous, by the way. We had so much fun.
Listen, I loved the interview. I loved that he called you Clooney, and not for Rosemary Clooney, but for George Clooney. And
I have never been called Rosemary Clooney, so there's still hope. Still hope for me, I guess.
I'm sure the many fans of yours who are over 90 will remember Rosemary Clooney.
All right,
you know, I slept in Danny Bonaducci's bed, by the way.
Okay, let's talk about that, because
he was nice enough to host my wife.
Was he in it?
After she was in it. We went out. We were in Phoenix. I can't remember why.
Wait, no, was Danny Bonaducci in Danny Bonaducci's bed?
Danny had just married a woman that he had met a few weeks earlier. They had a place in Phoenix. They had about 100-pound German Shepherd. I called him and he said, stay with us. And he and his wife slept on the couch, and my wife and I slept in his huge bed with his German Shepherd. That's all I got.
Well, that's not as good a story as if he actually was in the bed with you, but I'll accept that.
And that's actually fine.
Danny, by the way, 3 weeks is a long time for him, because he's actually met and married women like in the same day.
Yeah,
literally.
Maybe that was the same day. I don't know, it was pretty wild.
Well, he's had lovely. 3 wives, so it could be all of the above. Let's go back in time. So now you start Razor and Tie Music, which was this big, it grew into a big independent, perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, the largest independent music company at one point in the country?
It was a very large, independently owned music company. I'm not sure if we were the largest, but we were, one of the largest that was not owned by a big company or a lot of investors, but just owned by 2 schlubby guys.
Right. But you went to law school. You and your partner, Craig Balsam, you were lawyers.
That is correct. We both practiced law for about 5 years before we started our company. We met each other in law school and attempted to write songs together for a few years while we were lawyers. That didn't really work. Came to the conclusion we didn't want to be lawyers, and at some point started our company. I graduated 5 years after we graduated.
All right, so I'm going to put my parent hat on for a second. All the time, the effort, and the money to go to law school, and then you toss it after 5 years. What was your mother's reaction to that?
My mother was thrilled. My mother, who remains a vibrant, active person who still works and is great, is sort of a hippie type person who felt that me no longer being a downtown Wall Street lawyer and quitting it all to start something like this was a positive move. And the rest of the family elders were perplexed. My grandfather, who, dropped out of school in 8th grade and was a self-made person. My father, who didn't quite get what I was doing, were not too happy about it, but my mom was always great.
That's great. And so, okay, you decided this is it, we're done, and you and Craig, you're going to start a music company. You call it Razor and Tie. There's some significance to that name, right?
Well, Razor and Tie was a song that we had written. Craig and I wrote a bunch of songs in the when we were lawyers, like I said, in the mid-late 80s. They were all, I think, fairly competent. None of them were particularly great, and they all sounded like songs that artists we were listening to. Some songs sounded like REM, and something would sound like Tom Petty. None of them were great. Razor and Tie was a song we wrote about how we no longer wanted to get dressed up and shave and do the whole thing for the man. It was our rebellion song. And when no one wanted to listen to it, we decided to name our company after that.
I love it. And it started out kind of called the 70s Preservation Society. Like that was the angle, right? Like you were trying to bring back, relive, and have fun with the 70s.
Right. So what happened was we started the company in 1990, and it's probably hard for many people to remember, but in 1990, the 70s, which are now romanticized and glorified and everything else today, were sort of a pariah decade. People viewed that as the sort of decade of disco and polyester, which now everyone thinks is cool, but back then it was like, yikes. And Craig and I were both approaching 30, and we thought that our generation would start getting a bit nostalgic about the 70s. They were having kids, they were getting jobs, they were being disconnected from pop culture. And so we thought, okay, let's put some records out of hits from the 70s, which at the time we were selling our records on television. There was nothing that was being sold to that audience on television. It was all the greatest hits of the 1950s, and songs to sit by the fireplace by. Peter Lemongello plays the greatest hits of, So we did this thing where we did this tongue-in-cheek thing and called it the 70s Preservation Society, put a guy in a leisure suit on, made a TV commercial, said the 70s are back. It was the greatest decade ever. And then we put our first record was called Those Fabulous 70s. The 70s Preservation Society presents Those Fabulous 70s. And it was like the worst songs of the decade. It was Billy Don't Be a Hero, Seasons in the Sun,
Sylvia's Mother,
all that stuff. And it was kind of like, hey, we made kind of a joke out of it. People loved it. And so then we said that there actually was a 70s Preservation Society, which I guess there actually was. And that Craig and I were the chairman of it. And we hired a publicist, and like within a month, we were on all the national television outlets, Joan Rivers, CBS This Morning, talking about this 70s revival that really didn't exist, but that we said existed. And I guess we may have been fake news before there was fake news.
Oh my God. I remember watching, I don't know what it was. Well, let's call it like Good Morning America. It was a major national morning show where they take a lot of shit seriously. And you and Craig were on. And they were asking you questions, and the look on both of your faces was like, are we really here? Like, do they really take this shit seriously? Like, they know we were fucking around, right? No, apparently they don't. And it was the funniest thing to me, knowing the two of you and knowing what was behind it all, and then watching them treat you like you guys were like museum curators or something.
You're right, Andy. It was kind of crazy. And, it wasn't a major thing in the history of the world, but I thought it was an interesting point because you could actually sort of do this, and there was no way that anyone could tell whether what you're saying you were being serious about it. There wasn't internet and fact checkers. I mean, obviously we have greater problems with false information now, but we would get on TV and it would be either somebody would want to talk to us like in a sociological, when did the 70s actually begin? Not January 1st, 1970, but maybe when Nixon resigned. When did the 80s begin? When the Clash, I don't know. So we would be talking. Then sometimes they would, have us, do a hula hoop or play with a pet rock, or I would be sitting there talking about why, John Denver was better than the Beatles. So it just, we just did whatever anybody wanted us to do. We did that for a year or two. We had fun. It really helped us sell a ton of records, and then we kind of moved on from that. So yeah, we started with all these compilations of nostalgic compilations for younger people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much how it started. And I've been doing some variation of that in many ways ever since then.
And you had the Lava Lamp Awards events.
The Lava Lamp Achievement Awards.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to, leave something important out. And that's where I met Danny Bonaducci and Ron Palillo. I went up to the bar to get a drink, and to my left was Bonaducci. To my right was Arnold Horshack. And I was like, pretty cool party.
Don't forget Epstein. Epstein was there too.
Epstein. What was his, what's his real name?
Robert Hedges, I think, was his name, I think. Unfortunately, Epstein and Horshack are both no longer with us.
Oh, well.
But, I've had I'm not an old man, Andy, but I'm not a young man anymore. And
no, you're an old man.
But one of the really great achievements of my life was bringing Bonaducci, Horshack, and Epstein to one place. It was sort of my generation's version of the Beatles getting back together.
More like the Beatlemania cast, actually. But that event that I went to, I've never dropped acid, but I kind of look back on it as like that's probably what it feels like to drop acid. Because if
I couldn't tell you that.
And then the business kind of evolved into more distribution, right, and management over the years.
Yeah. What happened is we started the company just at the time that CDs were coming in to vogue. So one of the things about the 70s compilation records that we did is that people could not get a lot of those songs on CD at that time.
Mm-hmm.
CDs were just coming in. A lot of the songs that were on those compilations of ours were not, no one wanted the Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods album that featured Billy Don't Be a Hero. So a lot of our business in the early years was kind of getting things on CD that were not available. So we started with these compilations. Then we would get the rights to a lot of albums that had been out of print that major labels had decided not to put out on CD. And then we would do, legitimate, the Glenn Campbell collection, whatever. We would do a lot of different things. We'd start doing liner notes and, becoming a more serious sort of, the product's more serious. And then in the mid 90s, we started signing new artists. So we signed this artist, Dar Williams, who's, had a great career with us. Mm-hmm. And we would sign some artists who'd been around for a while, like Marshall Crenshaw. And then as time moved on, we started, we had a frontline, new music label with artists like Brand New and some others and the Pretty Reckless that did very well. And then we started a music publishing company, and then which did well and had a lot of big successful hits. And then in 2001, we created Kidz Bop.
Yeah, no. So I want to get into that because that was a pretty amazing business venture. What was the motivation, or when did you conceptualize that franchise and feel that there was a market for something like that? And if you can, just before you answer that question, just tell us what Kidz Bop was and is.
Kidz Bop Kidz Bop is the number one kids audio brand in the United States. It's the core of it is kids singing contemporary pop songs. Mm-hmm. It has tremendous awareness from nearly all people who have had kids in the right demo. And if people haven't had kids in that demo, they don't know what it is. It's kind of a strange thing. Mm-hmm. It's got, we used to do market research on it. It was like, 90% of people who had kids between 5 and 11 knew about it, and 4% of people who didn't,
What would be that age range now?
I would say, first, I'm not involved with it anymore, but mm-hmm. when I was involved with it before we sold it, I would say 4 to 10, mm-hmm. depending on where you are. Kids age out of it faster in New York and LA than they do in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And they started a little later. But the motivation for it was that at the time that Craig and I thought of it, our kids were birthday party age, 8, 6, whatever. This is around 2000. And just to be clear, so Craig, my partner, he has 3 kids. I have 3 kids. They're all around the same age. Craig and I are about the same age. So we had a lot of common experiences. And we were, going to birthday parties, kind of being in that world of parents of young kids. And that was at the time when Britney Spears and Eminem and 50 Cent were kind of blowing up, and parents were losing their minds a little bit about how racy and explicit some of this music was. And at the same time, kids were getting more sophisticated and were less interested in hearing Barney or Sesame Street or whatever music they were being told to listen to. So Craig and I thought that we could try to split the difference and get music that pop songs that the kids wanted to hear, but make sure that they were suitable, or make sure that the parents felt comfortable with their kids listening to it. And it turned out to just, it really kind of hit a really great niche, because the kids felt that they were listening to cool stuff and the parents were comfortable. At the same time, it also provided a window for the parents to sort of hear what was going on in pop music as well. So it checked a lot of boxes, and it worked, and as it launched a significant tour. There's like a couple different Kidz Bop tours that are up. It's international. There's a lot of visual content that's created. It's got lots of corporate partners. So it became a really big thing.
How many albums has it sold?
I think it's sold at this point, but I don't know because I haven't kept up with it, but it's probably, when we sold it, it was in the 30 to 40 million unit thing. And it also, there's a funny statistic, because we put a lot of these records out and because they would all chart very high. I think at one point, Kidz Bop, and it's released under the artist Kidz Bop Kids. And I believe at one point the Kidz Bop Kids, and this still may be the case, had more top 10 albums than any artist, ever, with the exception of like one or two artists, like, the Beatles or Elvis Presley or something, because we put so many records out. We'd put 3-4 a year plus Christmas records, everything else, and they would all hit the top 10. So I think if you look at most top 10 albums by an artist, Kidz Bop is way, way, way up there.
Yeah, no, I remember looking at the charts. I even commented to you at the time, like, holy shit, like, it's crazy, like, your number or whatever, And as a business model, that was a pretty good product, right? Because of the way it was structured and the way kids were hired, and, like, you didn't need to use the same kids from album to album. Like, it just made a lot of good financial sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted, when we started, the kids were sort of anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time went on, we created, the Kidz Bop Kids, who became the personalities associated with it, but it was never dependent on them.
Right.
But it was certainly advantageous to have some kids, particularly as social media and other things became more important, to have kids. And as our live tours and those kinds of things became a bigger part of the business, having specific personalities that the kids could that the fans could identify with became more important. But we never we never went all the way in to kind of create like Disney type stars. And so to the extent that was a business decision, I think it was a good one. And then these songs that we would cover, we'd sell enough records and still stream and sell enough so that the people who were writing those songs were very happy to work with us because they were getting nice royalties. So Kidz Bop kind of made everyone happy,
including you and Craig.
It made me very happy. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I just wanted to contribute to culture. So
those were fun days when you were part of that world and you had that company, for me at least. I mean, I remember you called me one time and you were like, want to see Springsteen at the Garden tonight? Backstage passes, the whole 9 yards, great seats. And we went. Do you remember that night?
I do. It was great.
It was great.
It was very fun to leave the law job, which I was not really very happy in, and to have our own company for 28 years with a partner who I respected and liked a great deal, and to never have a boss that whole time and do what I wanted to do. And look, it wasn't always great. Craig and I had to go through the Napster era when people were not paying for music. And I remember there was a period of time where, people said, what do you do? And I would tell them, like, oh my God, that's so great. And then from around 2007 or 8 to around 2012, people would say, what do you do? I said, I'm in the music business. They'd say, I'm really sorry. My condolences.
Schmuck.
What does it mean to be in the music business? People are like, we don't know anyone who pays for music. What exactly are you doing?
Right.
So the idea that Craig and I started the business when CDs were just coming in and blowing up and the business was getting crazy. And then that we went through the Napster and the music theft thing. And then we kind of emerged on the other side when the streaming and everything else came. You know, we kind of saw a lot of changes, but ultimately it was a great thing to do. And it was also great to be done with it. You know, we sold it at the right time for where we were in our lives. And I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad I don't do it anymore.
Well, I want to ask you about the changes in the music business, but first I got to put punctuation on that Springsteen story. Otherwise, people are going to think that you and I just had like a romantic night together at the Garden. The point of that story was that we got to say hi to Bruce backstage. And I got to say, great show, Bruce. And Bruce said to me, oh, thanks, man. So how many people get to go to Madison Square Garden and see Springsteen and then get to tell him in person after the show that it was a great show? Now, maybe you did that a lot, but that was my first and only time. So that was a big night for me.
No, one of my most disappointing Bruce Springsteen, I'm a big Springsteen fan, still am. And I've seen him many times. And we put one in 1995 or so, we put a record out by this guy named Joe Grishecki.
Yes, you took me to a tiny little show somewhere where you said, wink, wink, Springsteen's going to play guitar for him the whole night.
So Grishecki was sort of like, if Springsteen had never made it and was sort of like a working class guy,
he'd be Joe.
Grishecki was this guy who was this teacher in Pittsburgh who I think Bruce, and Joe is still around. He's a good guy. And Bruce, I think, saw Joe as like, there, but for the grace of God, go I. You know, so Grishecki sort of did it Springsteen style, but he never was really that successful. He had a couple records in the early 80s. He was a teacher. And in the mid 90s, we knew Joe, we did a record with Joe, and then Joe's manager said, hey, Bruce wants to make Joe's next record. And this is when Bruce was sort of like not doing a lot. And so we said, yeah, we'll put it out. And what's Bruce going to do? And so Bruce did like 7 small club shows with Joe, which you went to. And Joe's from Pittsburgh. Craig and I flew out to Pittsburgh for the opening of the quote, tour, unquote. And we were supposed to have lunch with Springsteen and Joe, and we were all at the club, and Bruce said, all right, let's meet me at Sandy's on 7, whatever. This is before the internet. So Craig and I, all excited, drive to this restaurant, wait there for 2 hours. There's no phone, there's no internet. We're like, we don't know.
And let me guess, no Springsteen.
We go, we kind of sit there, and then we get back to the club for sound check, and we see them. And Bruce goes, "Yeah, man, where were you guys? I was waiting for you."
Oh,
like, are you kidding me?
Seriously?
Yeah, sorry,
what happened?
That was we either didn't understand where it was supposed to be, or
oh man, you stood up Springsteen.
So, yes,
that's pretty cool.
And the man is
that's
never
cool or
forgiven
actually
me.
Awful, but that's a good.
He's
story.
never forgiven me.
Wow. But yeah, no, I remember we went to this thing. It was like the size of a Dunkin' Donuts, and there's like Springsteen, like 2 feet, like his sweat is flying on my face. It was pretty.
Yeah,
cool.
It was pretty funny.
You've been in and around the music business for 30 some odd years, and there have been an incredible amount of changes in that industry. What would you say are the biggest changes that have helped musicians? What are the biggest changes that have hurt musicians?
Well, certainly I would say the same things that help musicians today are probably hurting musicians. And you have to kind of like segment it. Like, some musicians are getting helped by things that are going on. Some are getting hurt. So look, having music accessible to everyone, with a click of a mouse, creates a tremendous number of opportunities for people. Musicians who are starting out today can get to consumers in a quick and efficient way that would have been inconceivable prior to streaming. So, you and I are sitting here, we could finish this interview and make a song, and by tomorrow afternoon, it could be on Spotify. That's an amazing sort of thing. And it's amazing. And it's an amazing thing for consumers to be able to, when you and I were boys and somebody said, hey, check this record out, well, that was a trip to Tower Records and $12. Now it's, so that's pretty fabulous in terms of music discovery, in terms of sort of flattening the field and not having artists be reliant on gatekeepers like, maybe radio stations or MTV or whatever. You needed to kind of generally have them bless you before you could be successful, or record companies. So that's huge, and it's great from a consumer perspective. The downside, of course, is how people get paid today. The amount of money that is available for recorded music is less than it was prior to that. There's obviously other ways that musicians make money today that existed before, but actually you do better now. Live music, performing live is more lucrative than it was. If you look at ticket prices today, I have a ticket stub here. I've got a bunch of ticket stubs here. Let me pull one out. Let's see. Oh my gosh, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, $35. You could see people for like, nothing. Now things are very expensive. So I think that the amount of money that people make has been sort of reallocated. The people who have been hurt are the kind of more culty artists. If you were an artist like Nick Lowe, or just somebody who had a small hardcore group of fans who would, you could put a record out, sell 100,000 records for $13, but you had 100,000 fans, you were making a lot of money. If you have 100,000 fans now and they're streaming your music and they don't buy it, you're making no money. So that's shifted things around a lot.
Let me ask you about that, though, because we've heard about that for years. People like me who aren't
Right.
in the music business. It's like you can have like billions of downloads on all these streaming platforms, and you're not going to make any money. A, is that
Well, that's
true?
not
And
true.
B, why aren't artists able to make a living off of downloads and streams and all that stuff?
That's not really true, but here's the problem. The problem is that the old model required consumers to spend a lot of money to get an album. And people, you recall, you were not, maybe when you were a kid, you were buying a lot of 45s, but people stopped buying singles a long time ago. So people were basically buying albums, and they were paying a significant amount of money. Even if they only liked one song, they were paying $12, $13, $14 an album. So that was a really kind of strange system, but it worked. Streaming is a mass system. Streaming is, there are artists who are streaming millions of tracks a day. They are getting paid. They are not getting paid as much as if they sold millions of records at $13 or $20 a pop, but they're getting paid. The people who are getting hurt are that kind of middle class and below, who used to have a model where they could sell a lot of records, or sell not a lot of records at a very high price.
Right.
So the other thing is that streaming is now just a part of how people make money. So, you're making money streaming, you're making money on Sirius XM. In the old days, terrestrial radio, broadcast radio did not pay royalties to the people they were playing. So all the radio play that all the artists got from the beginning of time to now on non-digital radio, which is basically everything but Sirius and Pandora, artists don't get paid a penny. Congress passed legislation that digital radio, they get paid. So every time an artist is played on Sirius XM, they're getting paid. So the problem, and if I'm getting too much in the weeds, streaming is just a part of the ecosystem in which artists get paid. They get paid other ways as well that didn't exist 20 years ago. So if you're streaming a lot, you're probably getting played on Sirius XM. You're probably selling a lot of merch direct to your fans. You're probably playing a lot of shows where you're making more money than you did. There's no question that there are a lot of artists who are getting hurt by this, but there are a lot of artists who are thriving on this. And the streaming model, I'm not here to defend everything that Spotify and those guys do, but they spend the majority of the revenue that they get is paid out to royalty recipients. It is an expensive thing to run. And look, if you're getting, if you're getting 1 million plays on Spotify, there's just not that many plays in a world where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of artists who are getting that many plays a week. So a lot of what you're hearing is the crankiness of some older artists who are like, hey, I used to make a lot of this money. And then, there's some newer artists who are not breaking through that way. But as a general matter, streaming has in many ways saved the music business. And I can tell you that because the music business was in an existential crisis in the early 2010s because there was not a revenue model to figure out. People were no longer willing to buy albums at that price. People were just streaming everything for free. And the fact that there's hundreds of millions of people internationally who are now paying $5, $10, $15 a month to have access to music has effectively saved the music business. And have the results been somewhat disproportionate for some people? Definitely. But as an overall thing, it's a model that works.
When you say save the music business, I want to clarify, are you talking about the corporate music business or the artists who make the music?
Thing. I'm saying it saved the recorded music business. Streaming, the legitimate paid streaming business, let's just say Spotify. Of course, there's Apple, there's Amazon, there's others, but the legitimate streaming business changed consumer behavior so many consumers, not all, but many consumers were like, yeah, I'll pay $10 a month to listen to whatever I want, and created a business model in which people who are creating music and people who own music, whether it was the artists, the songwriters, the record companies, whoever, there was a model for which they would get paid on a consistent basis. Now, did some people suffer as that money was sort of reallocated and the like? And so people who were streaming a lot got a lot, and people who were streaming a little didn't get that much? Sure. But in 2010, that didn't exist. And somebody, people who are complaining about this now. I and anyone in the music business is very grateful that exists. And, you have to then think much more about taking advantage of the tools that allow you to build, if you're not streaming a ton, you need to come up with other ways of figuring out how to do this. One of the interesting things is there's a band called Goose. I'm not sure if you know who they are. They're kind of a new generation.
I know. I don't know who they are.
No, sometimes you surprise me.
We've had this conversation a million times. You're way cooler than me. I'm still getting through the 80s.
I just know more about music than you do. But Goose is a band that can sell out probably Radio City twice.
Wow.
They're kind of the hottest jam band of the last 2 years. They have a career that they're making a ton of money, and they don't stream music very much because jam band music doesn't stream. Jam band fans aren't that interested in streaming music. But they have an insane live career where they're making a lot of money. And, so there's different kinds of music careers today than maybe there were in the past. You could have a band that's making gazillions of dollars streaming and doesn't really tour very much. You could have a band that is just Tedeschi Trucks, a band that's been around for a while that people like. They don't stream very much, but they have incredibly devoted fans who buy vinyl, and vinyl has gotten big again with a lot of people. So they're selling vinyl direct to consumer. They're playing tons of shows. They sell tons of merch. So artists and musicians are taking advantage of all the direct to consumer stuff that really was much more difficult to execute 20 years ago than it is now. So yes, they're making less money from their recorded music, but there's a lot of other things that are picking up the slack for that.
And what does the next 5 years look like? Any game-changing things happening in the music business, or is it just going to be a bit more of the same?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, TikTok, for instance, which has become a very important part of the music world and breaking artists, obviously with what's going on with them, they could become a less important. I mean, in addition to them, potentially being banned here, depending on what happens in Congress, they're also been sued by Universal, which is the biggest music company in the world, because Universal basically was accusing them of doing what, Napster and everyone else did and not paying for the music. So Universal, which I think controls 30% of all music out there, pulled their catalog of TikTok. So is TikTok going to be a meaningful player if they're both potentially going to get banned and they're not having access to serious music? I don't know what the impact of that's going to be, but that could be significant. I mean, it's hard for me to say, we've gone from, albums to cassettes to 8-tracks to CDs to Napster to streaming. What's next? I don't know. If you look at the people who invest in the music business and follow the music business, they're pretty confident that the streaming kind of model is here to stay. People are making investments with the idea that that model is a reliable long-term source of revenue. So since I don't see cracks in sort of the confidence of people thinking that's going to be here for a while, I don't feel particularly confident in saying this is all going to be replaced with another model soon. On the other hand, history would suggest something's coming down the road. I do think you'll see one interesting thing that you're seeing is you're seeing much more niche things than like when you and I were in our 20s. Like there's all these subcategories of music in which, like it's not mainstream at all, but there's this there's this contemporary bluegrass world that is a vibrant world. There's a metal thing that goes on. There's a more conscious hip hop thing that goes on. And there's all these kind of worlds that don't rely on sort of mass appeal, that are healthy, that provide a good amount of money for the artists, and don't rely on a lot of the things that those things couldn't exist 30 years ago because there wasn't, technology that would allow you to hyper focus on fans of a specific thing. So I'm always blown away. Somebody goes, "My God, did you just see this band just played Radio City? I've never heard of them, or they just played the Garden." I'm like, yeah, because they don't need to be on the radio, and they don't need all of this because they've got 200,000 crazy people who will do anything for them, and they've nurtured that, and those people will buy tickets and buy shirts and buy albums, and that's a different thing than 20 or 30 years ago, and I think a very healthy thing. So to the extent that there's more focus on just kind of completely serving an audience and not like Taylor Swift is a complete exception to everything without like how big she is. She's like, you think about how big she is right now, right? There were lots of artists that big 30 or 40 years ago. I'm not talking just cultural. I'm saying if you think about Taylor Swift's music and her music, did you see the We Are the World documentary 40, that they had that was really good? Half the people in that room had music that was as popular as her music was back then. Lionel Richie was just as big. I'm not saying as a personality and dating football players and affecting them. I'm just saying musically, everyone knew Lionel Richie songs. Everyone knew Michael Jackson songs. Everyone knew Bruce Springsteen songs. Everyone knew Prince's songs. Everyone knew Madonna songs. That kind of ubiquity doesn't exist anymore because people can go into their own worlds now. You can be completely obsessed with this or that, or you're a fan of this, and it doesn't. Back then, there was just a broader pop thing. So I think this kind of segmentation is more likely to continue where, hey, we're going to go to the Garden, see this act, and you're telling 9 of your friends, they're like, who?
Right. All right, so in 2007, you switched gears a little bit, and you started investing in movies. The first one was a movie that I produced called Serious Moonlight, which my late wife Adrienne wrote after Waitress, and which starred Meg Ryan and Tim Hutton and Kirsten Bell and Justin Long, and was directed by Cheryl Hines. And so what got you, other than my relentless pursuit of cash investment, what got you into the film business?
Well, you were helpful. It was it was kind of opportunistic. I mean, you know a lot more about that than I do with regard to making films, but it just, at that time, that was kind of an interesting period of time because, the whole DVD thing was blowing up. And so there was, I think, and the studios were pretty flush with cash, and they were also kind of setting up all these independent divisions to kind of focus on that. So it was a really healthy time in the movie world. It was, kind of before all the changes. And I've always been open to sort of looking at new things. And I think there was also an opportunity. There were some music related opportunities. I had some movie opportunities come to me through my music world. So when I did that with you, I also helped produce a Joan Baez documentary that was well received. And once I did that movie with you, I had some other opportunities that came to me. The net of my movie producing career was I had some good results, and then as time went on, I had some bad results. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't really know that much about what I was doing, that I got involved in some good projects at the beginning, and that the marketplace was sort of very receptive to that. And then the marketplace changed, and I kind of didn't realize it as much. And maybe some of the things I was involved in a little later weren't quite as good. But, it's funny, when Craig and I created Kidz Bop, I didn't think that I'd become like this kids music expert. I thought that I thought that we had kind of figured something out in the marketplace, taken advantage of that, filled a niche, did the whole thing. I didn't then go and do 20 kids projects. And the same thing on the movie side. I mean, I did a couple of those. I did 4 or 5, 2 or 3 went great, 2 or 3 didn't.
For the record, we need to establish that Serious Moonlight not only returned its investment to its investors, but it made some money too. So.
Oh, yours was a really good one.
Yeah.
No question. It was fun. I mean, it was great. And I might do a few more. But I'm not in the movie business. It just, it kind of happened through a variety of circumstances.
Is there a particular subject or direction that appeals to you more? Like, people must come to you all the time saying, hey, you invested in some films. How about this one? And it just does nothing for you. But obviously there have been some where it just resonates, where it's like, yeah, I want to help get that on a screen.
I'm still interested in music related stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. And I'm certainly interested in sort of in storytelling that might, or docs that might kind of get more into some of the kind of political and social issues that I'm interested in, that I spend a little time on. So those are probably two things that would be, and if there's something more random, great, but I'm more inclined. I've come close to doing a couple music things in the last year that were very interesting to me. And I'd always be, if I thought that there was a project that could sort of, move forward something that I cared about, I would definitely be interested in that.
And so you've also been involved in music festivals in your post-Razor and Tie life. Tell us about that for a minute or two.
I grew up in Ohio, and I was involved with some folks who had a festival in Cleveland, and I helped them open up festivals in Columbus, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh. I have been a live music person my whole life and love going to music festivals. Gone to Coachella a bunch of times, and Newport Folk and Bonnaroo, and love music festivals. And I'm very attracted to the kind of communal aspect of all these people coming together for shared experiences that, are not too choreographed and prescribed, and sort of things happen and it's fun. And I love that. So the idea for the festival business was to take the festival model and put it in smaller markets that you couldn't go see Lollapalooza or Bonnaroo or Coachella.
Right.
You want to go to Lollapalooza in Chicago, you're driving 6 hours. So giving something to those communities that's a little bit more local based and does not require people to travel 500 miles, I think is a good idea.
And so I want to ask you, as a very successful entrepreneur, what would you tell young people who are just starting out about the challenges of being an entrepreneur, about having a vision and trying to execute on that vision, and what that path might look like, and what advice you would have for them through that journey?
Well, I would say that it's not for everyone. It's funny. I've got some very good friends who, have worked large corporate jobs their whole lives, and sort of what they've been doing for 30 or 40 years is so dramatically different than what I've been doing in terms of just sort of what you do each day. So, the thing about being an entrepreneur is that it's risky. I mean, I'm not going to say anything that's not obvious on that, but it's like you have to sort of be willing to not have security, be willing to fail, be willing to rely on yourself. And while that all sounds good theoretically, I think there's a lot of people who that's not a comfortable situation for. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying, like, and you ran your own company, you had your ups and downs, you're very familiar with this. It's like, there's a lot of people who don't want to deal with that and would be much happier being the SVP of X for Y. And that's not a judgment call. That's just like, we had years during those lean years, when the music business turned, that it got pretty dicey in terms of like what was going to happen. And at that point, we weren't 30, we were 50 with families to support. So you have to kind of have the stomach for that. And, you have to, I think, it's funny because when you're an entrepreneur, I think you would agree with this too. Like 80% of what you do does not necessarily have that much to do with the content or the nature of your business. People think, they would go, oh, you're in the music business. That's so cool. That's so sexy. I'm like, well, I still have the same number of employees that you have. I have to hire, fire, promote, deal with them. I've still got an HR department. I've still got a lease. I've still got, lots of laws that I've got to comply with. I've still got to, think about how am I going to get more money and deal with the bank and, a lot of this is not particularly exciting or sexy. You got to sort of deal with all that stuff. So I think you can't know for sure whether you're up for that when you're 25 or 30 years old, but you have some inkling about that, and you need to kind of go, oh yeah, I'm up for that. I have the mentality that can kind of handle the ups and downs of this. And I think you also have to have some really strong idea of what it is you want to do.
No, you said something before, which is really interesting because I've been saying for years that if I could go back in time, before I started my business, I would have become a lawyer and a therapist first because I ended up spending probably half my day dealing with legal crap and emotion, just people stuff. Not everybody's cut out for that. I mean, you were a lawyer, so you worked in a firm, but you and Craig had a bug that was like, I want to start my own business. Do you think that's an inherent thing? Like that's just part of your DNA?
I don't know if it manifests itself necessarily as I am going to be an entrepreneur and start my own business, but I do think that there are certain people, you certainly are one, and I'm probably another one, don't do that well in that kind of a structured corporate environment. And I also give my mom props. My mom, what we talked about earlier, she raised us to be, you're supposed to be really happy. And I wasn't happy. And a lot of people's response to not being happy is to continue to do it because you're making good money and that's what you're supposed to do. My brother is probably the world's most successful skydiver. That is what he has been doing for a living since he's 19 years old. He's done nothing else. He's 62 years old.
David?
He's won the world championship numerous times. And I think that's a bit, again, from my mother's, like, you're supposed to find something that you like to do. So I think that it's less, I know I want to be an entrepreneur, at least for me. And it was more like, I know I don't want to do this and I need to have some control over my life and be involved in something that I'm passionate about. But, going back to an earlier point you made, I loved the 15, 20 years that we had the company. I loved mentoring people. I loved working with people. I loved helping people. At some point, I hate to say this, but I was like, okay, I'd done enough of that. And I think with the kinds of things I'm doing now, whether it's the radio show that I have or other stuff that I do, I like the fact that I'm not managing people. Very happy that I do not have a number of people who I have to supervise, make decisions about, impact their lives in terms of good or bad. I did that and I'm really happy I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you're at a point in your life now, you're an old guy and you're semi-retired and you don't have the patience for that anymore.
Pardon? What'd you say?
So at the end of every interview, or most interviews, we ask people a question which we hope gives us a window into their souls. And that question is, who are your top 5 musical artists of all time? Now, you, my friend, having spent a career in the music business, I think that might be an interesting question for you, or the answers might be interesting. So go for it.
Well, one of the things I do now is I have this radio show called Modern Sounds, and I have this music playlist called Modern Sounds, in which I basically find and curate new music for people who are not that new, which has been great because it's kind of consistent with what I've been doing since I started the 70s thing, which is sort of curating music for my peers. And so I've got playlists with hundreds of artists that are new artists that I love, but I'm not quite as connected to those artists because my relationship with them is more, clicking on a couple songs and seeing them live as opposed to buying an album a year and like just losing myself on that album. So I think that I probably have a deeper connection and relationship to the older music just because of the way that we consumed it and how it was sort of part of our lives and a lot of the new music today. But I'm not sure that old music I like more, but it's
all right. But if they were sending you to a deserted island for the rest of your life and you could only take 5 artists or bands with you, let's just cut to the chase. Who would they be?
All right, I would take the Beatles.
Oh God, twice in 1 week. This is my dream.
Which I'm sure every 60-something-year-old person, half of the 60-something-year-old people you've had on your show probably say that.
No. In fact, you and one other person this week have been the only people to say that. Isn't that insane?
Is that true?
Yeah. Literally. I get things like, all right, Wham. I'm like, really? Wham before the Beatles? Like, you wouldn't believe the stuff I get. So thank you.
All right. I would take Stevie Wonder.
Good choice.
I would take a combination of Paul Simon and Simon and Garfunkel. I would take Tame Impala.
Who?
See, this is the issue. I will tell you who Tame Impala is in a second. I didn't prepare for this question, so I should have done that because I know you do this. And I would take REM.
Mm-hmm. All right, now tell me who Tame Impala is.
Tame Impala is, they put a record out called Currents in 2015 with a song called The Less I Know, The Better, and another song called Make It Happen, which is maybe my favorite record of the 21st century. And I've seen them live many times, and they're just amazing. And I kind of feel like, I feel like I have to have some representation of the music that I listen to now, as opposed to just, going to stuff.
I'm writing that down because I have to check that out. If they're in Cliff Chenfeld's top 5 of all time, I have to check them out. Cliff, this was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It was a pleasure,
Andy. Love chopping it up with you.
All right, take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.